You're on mute, Mark.
Hey everybody, it's the Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox, and it's Sunday, the 29th of June. Uh, Good news from the research front. My paper with Mark Anderson and Silas Hooper has been accepted at the upcoming Hypertext conference. It's about a new hypertext view, new Tinderbox view. So that'll be fun for you to read and play with quite soon. Coming up at the end of next week, we have the 2025 Artisanal Software Festival at artisanalsoftwarefestival.com. So there'll be some fun discounts from some people designing fun software. Without further delay, here's Michael Becker.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the meetup. Can't believe June's already over. Crazy. So typically around the format, we go around the room and new people invite themselves. Don't see anyone new today. And if we have a theme, we jump into the theme. We did have a theme today, but our speaker was unavailable. So we will just have a generalized conversation about anything that comes up. So without further ado, then let's jump in and let's talk about anything that comes up. What projects are people working on? What do they have interest in? And I might ask, Mark, are you in a position to show us yet a little bit the new theme? Is that something we want to do today or possibly do it later? And you're on mute again. You're on mute again.
I'll get the hang of this mute button.
Now you're frozen.
My offer stands to see if I can help him with his internet connection.
Yeah. Painful.
People are
There you go. You're back.
okay. Okay. Obviously, I don't want to try again. It's the very mention of Information City seems to terrify the internet from here. So I'll do that when we have some more space and office internet. Congratulations to Mark Anderson, I think twice, is it not?
Why are we congratulating you, Mark?
Uh, Two papers.
Well, I haven't heard about the second, but yes, oh, that'd be fun.
And is the next hypertext conference, is that the one in Chicago?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's in when is it? Do you have a link you can drop in the chat?
September 15th, I think. I'll get the link.
Nice.
Yeah,
For those, I was just going to ask, for those of us who are unfamiliar with presenting papers at conferences, how does one go about that? The paper's already written and you submit it to a committee to see if they welcome it for their conference?
yeah. Basically it's well, it varies from conference. Broadly, it's certainly in the ACM conferences, which is the Association of Computing Machines. It's a sort of delightfully 1950s title, but basically it's probably the one of the main computer related conferences. So it's a professional society that sponsor a load of conferences. You submit a paper. All these conferences have a call for papers. It's like because back in the day, doing computing meant you lugged your computing machine to there to show people that it wasn't just just wasn't all made up. It actually worked. Whereas nowadays it's a bit different. So they sit as an adjunct. There are lots of journals. So in journals, you send your paper to a journal, and they send out for peer review, and they either get back to you when they want, which might be a year later, which might be forever. With a conference, it's actually normally much more short notice. So this conference is September. The deadline was in about late April. Your paper will then be read by at least two people, possibly more if there's a bit of a split. He'll go through the paper and decide whether they think it's worthy of publication at the conference. and yeah, and it's no more than that. So basically, it's being arguably judged by your peers. When you read the reviews, you may think otherwise. Sometimes they're not all as kind as you'd like, but generally they're informative. And so that's what I'm sure of it. I mean, anyone can submit. It's not that you have to be credentialed. It's obviously more of a medium for people who work, as it were, in the academic biz. So you're more likely to see people who are actually working in academia, but it absolutely doesn't need to be the case. And you will see, especially in computer publications, people who work in companies outside. I mean, that often causes them another problem because they might want to publish about something that the marketing department would say is secret source, and we can't tell anyone about it. So there's a certain friction there, but it is broadly an open system. Does that help?
Well, and then so your paper is accepted. The conference is held. I guess it's actually a gathering of physical human beings in a location. Do you give a presentation on your paper?
Yeah.
Is everybody required to read your paper before they attend the
Nope.
conference?
So the papers normally in this day and age become, I don't know what happened before the internet, but now they are available online the first day of the conference. The conferences are normally outside things like the pandemic or current border issues. They are normally held in person. Sometimes they're what's now called hybrid, which means that you can attend remotely. If you have a paper accepted, the general expectation is that you will turn up standing on your own 2 feet in front of your peers and say what you really think. The nice thing is that the presentation often is actually a much fresher take. So the paper tends to be full of what you thought and your proof and all that sort of thing, so that people can look at it and say, okay, this is worth reading. Whereas in a presentation, you're more able to say, well, this is why I did it. This is the heart of what I'm doing. So the presentations themselves are almost worth turning up for, if the field is of your interest. But it's not private. The conferences have a cost of attending. If you belong to the relevant professional society, there may be a reduction in the rate. And there is nothing secret. It's just that the conferences are akin to journals. It's just that they actually involve more turning up in person, and it's something. It might seem odd, but if it means once a year you get to stand in a room with maybe the 1,000, maybe it's just sometimes the 10 people who do what you do, who are scattered across the globe. It's wonderful. In fact, the nicest conferences are where it's small, because you have the meeting and then you all go out to dinner afterwards and still carry on talking. So it's like a sort of 4-day mental spa.
So that's the other portion, is that you give your presentation, and then there's a Q&A, there's a discussion.
Yeah. So there's a Q&A. Of course, there is a timetable, which means that the Q&A is limited, and there's always someone who decides to ask the rambling multi-part question that is more about their own work than yours. But that aside, it's also a thing that is a chance to say, look, I'm here all week. I look like me. If this is interesting to you, I think, which is tremendously important for younger people entering the field, where often there's this sort of sense of credentialism, and I don't have standing. The nice thing is conferences, certainly like Hypertext, anyone will talk to you. Indeed, about 2 years ago in Rome, I was talking to some people who sort of digital humanities folk, and I said, "Are you enjoying it?" He said, "Yes." He said, "People actually talk to you here." So I think your experience may vary depending on which venue you go to.
Well, thank you for that, because this has come up many times, and I have no conception in my mind of what takes place at a conference and why it would be rewarding or important, or where it fits in your. So you're an academic, Mark, are you? Right? You're in a teaching profession.
Sort of. I have at least one foot in it. Yes. Yeah. I suppose I should say.
And Mark Bernstein, you're an active software developer, but an academic in the sense of what, contributing to the body of knowledge of hypertext or computing, or.
Yeah, I've always tried to keep an oar in the research community, and I found that rewarding personally and useful. And some key parts of Tinderbox come from those usual, sometimes from conference papers I've heard, but very often from those very late, very alcohol-sodden post-conference meetings. The most conspicuous being I had a demo that was explaining my AI-based HTML export plan. And two French researchers took me aside and said, this might work, but it's very complicated. Here's the right way to do this, and outlined what became the Tinderbox HTML export template. And the two of them and Randy Drake, who was then big man on campus in hypertext, just set it out for me. And, great. I don't think anyone had actually ever implemented it, but they had the design firmly in their heads.
So one more question though, how rare is it that an active, somebody who makes their living writing a commercial product is presenting and contributing in this fashion? Is our conference presenters mostly academics, or is it kind of an even split between people active in the development community?
Changes a lot.
So while we wait for the internet to turn speaking rights to Mark, I'll try and fill in and say, I think what he's about to say is it varies. I think it's very true. It varies by venue, and it varies on where things sort of are in the market. But certainly in the computer science world, I think there's always been an attempt to include practitioners, and the world is a better place for it. I think because each has its downsides. It is the case in academia where people say, well, this didn't work, but I've got another 30 years in this field to prove it does. Whereas in a company, you might say, actually, this is a moving target. We don't have that long, So it cuts both ways. And the other thing is, anyone is welcomed to sort of turn up. It's not as if you have to turn up and you've got to be this tall to get in through the front door. Not at all. There is a cost normally for conferences, but it doesn't set itself up to be exclusive in terms of who may see what's there or who may speak as to what's there. I see Mark's back, so I'll let him carry on.
Win.
Well, Mark, you froze when you were about to say something, so we missed out on some wisdom there, I think. But I will continue.
You invoke the internet gods again.
So, Dave, in terms of the sort of the corporate versus academic thing, it depends on the culture of the conference to some extent. There are some that are more academic, and for a long time in computing, there were some that were sort of very, very practical. That would include academics or people who are at universities, but often, but also people from the corporate world. That has changed, I think, somewhat as companies have wanted to invest less in people going off to talk about what they're doing and not wanting to disclose much about what they're doing for it. And also as sometimes academia just goes off in some different directions for a while than what industry is interested in the short term. But still, I think Mark's right, in computing, there's still much more crossover than you might find in other areas. But choosing the right conference is the important thing.
There's also the issue that corporations will often use the opportunity to present a paper on your work as a consolation prize when they decide that that's not a technology they're going to pursue any further.
Yeah, there's a famous Bernard Shaw quote from the play Man is Superman. What is it? Man is Superman in 1903, where it says, "Those who can do, those who can't do, teach." Paraphrasing. And I've always I've always thought about, I've since modified that quote that says, "Those who can do, those who can't do, teach. Those who want to make a difference in the world, do both." And so I find that when you have your feet in both academia and industry, it's really quite powerful.
And remember, in computing, the line between academic research and corporate research has not always been very bright. There are corners like theoretical computer science that tend to be almost exclusively academic interest. But for most of the recent past, there have been either collaborations or simply borderline organizations like SRI and Xerox PARC that are not technically academic, but have people whose roles are essentially academic outside the academy. It's become fairly unusual to have people like me floating alone in the night, but it used to be more common. It's by far from unheard of.
Mark, maybe you can explain a little bit too. Like, what do we mean by academic? And what, and what's the spectrum, from a survey paper to a solving a project paper? Can you talk to us about that spectrum a bit?
Well, I'm using academic, meaning part of a modern research university, which also raises questions. What about teaching institutions, undergraduate institutions, and so forth? But the second half, which was interesting, but I just distracted myself.
Yeah, and the second half is like the spectrum of research. So like, from like survey quantitative type academia, from qualitative type academia, to where would you put yours and Mark Anderson's papers on that, and how does one go about turning that type of thinking into academia? What's the framework there?
For research papers, which are what we're talking about, the criteria is original contribution to knowledge. It could be in the form of an integrative review. For example, here is this area that everyone has been saying they'd been meaning to try. I've read everything there is that's been written about it, and here's how it works. Or something, here is a new theorem, and here's how I would apply it and why it matters. Here is a new visualization. Here are what it looks like it's good at. Here's where we don't like it, and here's how we might extend it.
Okay.
I mean, it's worth saying that hypertext is interesting, and it is long, and I think quite deliberately stood with a foot in both arguably in the arts and computer sciences. So go back to Andy Van Dam's sort of much repeated thing about the fact that he used a computer for an arts course, which did not go down well with the hierarchy at Brown University, who pointed out that computers were for science and for serious knowledge. The reality is you need to pull from all areas. One of the problems often with the niches that conferences or journals become is they don't pull widely enough. And it's sometimes someone new wandering in and said, that's actually not quite how it is. You think, oh, actually, you're right. Ah, good. Well, we've learned from that. And it's hard to say. The other thing about academia, and I think a comparatively recent thing is probably 10, 20 years, is this whole publish or die thing. So now your rice bowl is dependent on you getting X papers published at a certain level, or you're deemed not to be useful. And that is why Mark was saying, there aren't actually many research academics left. It used to be the case that someone said, give you tenure, just go away and tell us about interesting stuff. Those days, sadly, are pretty much gone. So there's a heavy load, and it's not perhaps to our general betterment. But I mean, that is just the way the world is at the moment. I mean, it's not for us to debate here. But so one of the problems, actually, arguably, you might argue, is there's actually over publishing, because so many people are under the cosh to turn out N papers a year or something, that instead of the thing of turning up when you actually had something to say, now you have to turn up to say, I'm here and this is what I'm doing. So it is remarkably hard to put a clear shell around the notion of what an academic is. And Mark Bernstein stands in front of you, someone who's made a storied contribution to the world of hypertext. I mean, what was there at the 87 conference? So 34 years of the conference, there aren't many people you see these days who were there at the original thing and can say to you, well, I don't think it's quite like that. And not I might add in a sort of corrective way, but just saying that, you know, why would you know? If you weren't in the room, you wouldn't have known that actually what these people were trying to do was something else. And think how much technology changes over time. So the richness of being able to be around with people who've seen things that you might not yourself have personally experienced, and to give you another perspective, is the real richness.
Nice. That was a fruitful conversation, Dave. Thank you. Okay, so what projects are people working on? Thoughts, ideas, any challenges you addressed this week? Things you want to discuss? You know, again, I've always got stuff to show and tell, so we can play with that too. But
If anyone has experience using as a adopter either of the MCP implementations that we've seen described last week and earlier in the spring, I'd be interested in hearing about how that's gone.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, actually in a similar vein, it's something really for the sort of community to help feed into. I was thinking we've had some really, really interesting presentations recently about some of this new technology and how it applies to sort of knowledge tools as we know them. And I found myself, sadly, I short noticing somebody asked me to do some analysis, something, and I thought, maybe actually this probably is something where I ought to just stick it in a local LLM. And I suddenly thought, what I actually need, what would be useful, is not someone to say, I did this, install the following, but to do perhaps a less pedagogical thing of saying, if you want to do this, you're going to need one of the following. And, you know, here's something, but it's a sort of, it's first of all, these are the elements you'll need. In other words, there isn't an app that just does this. You are going to need something in the following categories, because these things make up the ecosystem of what you're going to use. So in other words, there isn't a thing where you just press a button, download, and it all happens for you. You're going to need the following things. Some of them will be under the hood, some won't. Just teasing the thing for those of us who actually like to read a bit of the manual before we just press install, as to say, okay, and also to understand this is sort of basically what you're getting involved in. In other words, you might be opening up something you don't want, or it does, you aren't, and don't worry because we're telling you that it's not something to do. So before you do, as can often happen, you spend a day installing all this stuff, and at the end of the day, it still doesn't work. And now you put all this stuff on a system that you don't know how to remove, and you're not there. Because I found myself just last night asking the sort of the Google AIs, well, the you know, Google search, saying, so what does it mean putting your information in an LLM? And it really fluffed the answer. So even before, so you've got to set up a local system even before you can put stuff in. But what is the act of submission? None of this is at all clear. Now, if you're using it, it doesn't matter because you sort of pass that. You have a vague sense of comfort or discomfort with what you're doing. But a really interesting, it's almost like the social layer around the technology. So this is what is involved in doing this knowledge work, using these new tools. And the technology does what the technology does, and you may have to, you know, tweak one or two things and do one or two settings. But what you are actually doing, I think, is something that's not not well described, and something that, as we are not a technology-based forum so much as a sort of knowledge-based forum, is something that might be interesting to explore, and we could potentially do that as a start, maybe a forum thread, so it's available to everyone. And the other thing that comes with this is say, well, we're doing this at moment in time, sometime in 2025. So if you read this a year later, the likelihood is it's changed. And with a forum, that's fine. You can lock it off. So even if the internet looking at it doesn't know it's out of date, a human looking at it says, okay, fine, maybe I need to see, oh, there's a link saying we did this a year later and here's how to do it. I don't know, but that's a thought.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Okay, I've been playing with that quite a bit. As I was saying in the preamble, I'm thinking about getting myself the Max Studio and setting up the LLM, local LLM models. And in doing that kind of research, you're right. There's a lot more than just like install the Olama model, right? It's all of the sub models too. And then because I've been doing my work for my book, it's like transcribing interviews. Well, if you're going to do that, then you need WhisperX, and if you go that way, then you need the Pianote libraries. So then you can diarize those, and in order to do that, then you need the Python shell. And so it's really, yeah. So that's kind of what you're suggesting, Mark, is to kind of walk through all of those different environments, if you will, that need to be set up. But especially for the non-technical person, like what does it mean to set up a Python environment? And once you've done it, how do you delete it if you don't want it? And if I leave it there, is it going to cause a problem? Interesting. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts, comments, questions, things they're working on? No?
Just briefly, I learned something interesting about Tinderbox and undo. If you delete a note from Tinderbox by accidentally hitting the delete key and go up and hit undo, it does restore the note. But because the note is in a container, the container applies all the default on add actions. So it may have been of one prototype when it was mistakenly deleted. It'll come back as a different prototype depending on what the container does. So something to keep in mind if you have moving parts.
On that note, though, can I give you a suggestion, Dave? If you put a pipe sign in front of the equals on your on add, that at times, that would make it possible so that when the old note is being put back, if the value of prototype already exists, it won't be overwritten. So that's a nice little trick to know, in that the pipe equals means apply this action if the value of that attribute is empty. Otherwise, leave it alone and don't change it.
Okay, that's a simple add.
Yeah. And again, how does it? Yeah. So exactly that. And so if you look in the chat where it says prototype pipe equals a task. So prototype pipe equals p task. That pipe means that it won't be changed.
Just to be clear, so when the normal on add action creates a prototype for a normal post, and the post that I deleted was an image post, which is a different prototype and uses a different template. So the pipe equals.
Yes, go ahead and demonstrate it. It's easier.
Okay.
Let me find my mouse. Where's my mouse? There we go. Yeah, I got this training from the Marks a while ago because my big thing is I was accidentally dragging stuff into different containers and it was driving me crazy. All right, so all right, do you guys see the Tinderbox file? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So let's say you had a container we'll call a notes. A notes. And we'll go up here and we'll say prototypes, person, and we'll go to outline because that's easier. And let's say like P notes. Let's do an on ad. Give it a little icon so we've got the visuals. All right, so if we add this to this one and we say, on ad prototype equals person. So let's just start with this. Then we'll do the pipe in a minute. Okay, so if we do that, and let's create one other like P entity. Let's demonstrate that. All right, so let's say you had these different prototypes, and I'm now going to go add a note into there. So by adding a note into that directory or into that container that's got an on add of P person, that note works. If I've got, we'll call it Eastgate. Right, and so let's get, spell it right. And let's say we've got a company called Eastgate. So if I drag this note in as expected, that changes the prototype because the on add triggers. So if I have a pipe in front of that, when I drag that in, because this note already has a value for the prototype, it doesn't change.
And am I confused? The pipe is normally the symbol for a logical OR.
Yeah,
Is
it's an
that
OR operator. And
okay?
again, Mark Bernstein, maybe you can, or Anderson, maybe you can re-explain the logic there. Why is that OR?
Sure, it's or equals. So if it already has a value, then you don't do anything. Otherwise, you do the assignment. It's if you have a Boolean assignment of A equals B or C. If B is true, you don't do anything with C because you already know the value that you're assigning. So you can save work. And this way, if you already have a value, we don't need to compute the right side of the assignment statement. Was actually introduced by Brian Ritchie as part of the C language back in the 60s.
Well, that makes learn something new every day. So this has been a valuable meetup.
Yeah, this has saved my bacon more than once. And the key thing is it's not just about, it works for any attribute. So if you have fairly complex on add or related action code, I use it a lot for terms and other types of categorical labeling so that when I move my notes around my Tinderbox file, things don't get messed up. All right. Mr. Anderson, you're here.
Just quickly tell that then I'll pass on to the next note, which is, and it might make you think. So if you're watching closely earlier, Michael moved something into the container. It got an attribute, a prototype. He moved it out. It did not remove the attribute. And I think this speaks to the part was in your question, Dave's question about, well, if I undo, in our mind's eye, it's obvious, quotes, where we want to get back to. But for the system, of course it isn't, because there may have been, you may have made the attribution of giving it a prototype some while back. So it's not obvious that in undoing it, where and with what scope something is done. Now, in the most immediate sense, it might say, well, you gave it a new prototype. I didn't want that. I wanted the one that had before. But what was the one before? Because we didn't save that. When you delete something, you don't normally necessarily store its whole history. So it's a little bit more, like so many things I'm learning over time, a little bit more complicated than I thought. So some care is needed. And I think the trajectory of these things is the first time you hit something that sort of has those sort of dependencies, it normally makes you think about, okay, well, do I need to be a bit more defensive? Because I just don't think the undo can ever be that clever, short of it holding every state. In other words, it's not a fault of the code as instantiated as such, because it can't be, because our mind's much better at holding these associations than a system is. It's one area where perhaps we still win out against our robot overlords.
Awesome.
Well, the good news is there was no data loss because the only thing that was changed was the prototype. The attributes that set up the HTML for displaying the image and so forth were all still there. I just needed to assign it the prototyp photo, and then the proper template was assigned, and everything worked as designed. So I immediately figured out, not immediately, I exported and my picture wasn't there, so I went back and looked. I figured out what had taken place, that the container had done the on ad and made it into a normal post, and I just changed the prototype and everything was back to normal.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I mean, I think, and indeed, I saw it originally on your blog, and I think you posted in the forum, and I think it was well explained. I mean, the only, if it is literally a case of, I'm going to give you a prototype that maybe changes the badge or something, really no harm done, apart from a bit of visual tailback. But if I'd set it to a prototype that then does a whole scan of things, that might have been unintended. But I think that falls back to us as a person designing the system. Sort of a caveat emptor in a way is just consider. It's always hard in the moment because it's hard enough just to get the thing working to start with. You don't think about all the ways it can go south on you. So it normally needs the first wheels up landing to realize, okay, I may need to put a bit more gating in. But again, despite the fact that these things rarely happen but can do, is the joy of a system that allows you to reset things fairly fast. Comes back into the measure. Because I think the reason a number of us here in this sort of forum are using a tool like Tinderbox is we can do that. I saw the horrors of things I've used, so I realized that I basically trashed the whole thing. Now I'm going to have to build it from the ground up again. So, segueing to the thing I put my hand up, which was partly prompted by Dave's comment of, I learned something interesting, is that corresponding with somebody who very kindly, as actually they so kindly do these days, sent me a rather nice, very polite DM saying, I just read something in ATBRF and I don't think it's right, was the fact that if you use, or certainly in a map, if you use control return, you no longer get a new note above your note. And this is because silently, and it's not particularly well publicized, I think it was going from whatever came before Tahoe, whatever came before the current OS X around 15. So as we went from 14 to 15, or maybe it was a bit earlier, the OS has appropriated that. And there isn't, well, I'm not sure there is a turn off for it. And what was really interesting about that, and it makes me reflect, when trying to document the app's shortcuts, there's an interesting gray area where you cross over from things the app explicitly sets for itself, as opposed to things that are inherited or expected to be inherited from the operating system. Okay, most of us expect, Command P to print on a Mac or Command C to copy, but you don't have to go too far beyond that. Quite a few of the navigation keys that sort of, I guess, descend to us from Finder actually are variable depending on the app you use. And there's no right. Again, the way to view this is that the way I think of it, if it doesn't work, well, that's a bummer. I'm going to have to find a way around it. And there are all sorts of things and various sort of methods, both in OS and using available app utilities to set custom attributes. I mean, the one thing that is worth noting for those who don't know this fact is that if you find there's a shortcut that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, the likelihood is it's all down to the order in which the apps load on your system. So if two apps, say, want to own, I don't know, Control X, but do different things, the first one to load basically sort of owns Control X in the system. And even though it may do nothing in the second app, it still stops the second app using it in the way it wants. And the next question you ask is, isn't there just an app that tells me who owns what? Well, it turns out, no, there isn't. There are one or two utilities you can find that sort of hint to it. But often it literally involves sort of turning off all your apps and starting them up in a different order and seeing who's sat on what. Now, obviously, if it's something you really need, you've got two choices. You can either load the thing you want first, but life doesn't roll like that. So in reality, you may find that what you want to do is you want to set a custom shortcut for something you care and need about. It might not necessarily be the one you want, but at least it's one that you've got a reasonable chance that you think you control. And that's it. Thanks.
Right. As you were speaking, by the way, I want to go back to the AI discussion, Mark. Something just popped in my head. I wanted to remember. So I was working with a client this week, and one of their comments was really interesting in that they said there is certain corporate data that we never want going into a public LLM. Customer data, proprietary code. Just don't ask it, to take our source code and say, can you fix this for us? Don't ask it to say, yeah, here are our customer names and their personal identifiable information. Can you do something with this for me? That's all not to be done. Flip side of that, though, he says everything else he wants, and this is the CEO of an organization, he wants his team using the public LLMs primarily to train the public on how he wants his company presented. And so, he'll say, here's my company. Can you give me an overview of my company? And the LLM spits back a terrible answer. And then he wants his team saying, no, that's actually not correct. Here's who we are. This is what we're doing. Here's the white paper that we've just written. Can you help us edit this? And he has found that just within a very short period of months, they can be training the LLMs in their context and in their category to the way they want to be presented. And he said it's only taken a few months, and that methodology has really changed the public persona of the company. So that's another kind of marketing view of how to effectively use the different things, and you want to do it for each of the environments. You'll do it in chat and in Claude and in Gemini to make sure that they're all talking about you the way you want to be talked about. So I found that a really interesting and insightful kind of approach to LLMs via the lens of as a marketer. All right. Anybody else? Thoughts, comments, questions, things you want to experiment with? Otherwise, I can throw a couple of agenda items that we might want to discuss. One is I can, let's see, circling back to conferences. Here's a piece I wrote. Mark, you want to talk about that a little bit? The paper you wrote?
Nope. It's actually a blog post I wrote, but rather extended one. There was a science fiction writing conference that was having a bit of a meltdown. I wrote a piece about how to go to academic conferences as.
Nice. All right, we'll check that out. All right. So I think a couple things we might want to talk about is two things. One, I could show. I think I've been talked about before how I've been doing rover.com dog watching to make some extra cash. And so I figured out a way to pull out of the Rover reports that I get, pull it into Tinderbox, and then actually evaluate the revenue that's being generated and then pull it into timeline so we can actually view the various client sittings. So that was kind of an interesting and fun project, just to turn Tinderbox into a qualitative tool. So I could show that if you guys are interested. The other thing that was also fascinating is this week, I created an outline for a book that I'm working on. And within each of the sections of the book, I was identifying the purpose. And, this is why we're doing this section. And by the time I got around to having the entire outline ready, yeah, it was too overwhelming for the executives. It was just too much. And so using chat, I said, what would be a way to create an accordion method that would make it easier for me to expand and collapse this outline for the executives when they're, and they don't have Tinderbox. So how do I export this out of Tinderbox and get it into their hands so it can expand and collapse? And as a result of that, I learned about the details and summary tags in HTML that work really well in Tinderbox Preview, and then when exported, allow you to export an accordion HTML page that you can give to somebody to expand and collapse your outline. So if you're all interested, I could share with that. And then the third thing that I thought we might talk about was Mark Bernstein's interesting request this week around counting citations. So different strategies of extracting and then counting your use of citations and the different pattern matching there. So those are three topics I thought we might explore in the kind of 34 minutes we have left. So or 44 minutes we have left. So what would you all like to do? I'll leave it up to the public vote.
No, Win has a hand up.
Win.
So my hand was actually up about your previous comment about training the LLMs.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious if you've seen described anything publicly that they are doing that kind of training, because I've seen other information that says that they aren't doing a lot with what people type in, because that has problems. Now, Gemini is an interesting thing because it's running more off the public web than anything else. But to affect the training data for, say, Anthropic or OpenAI, I'm curious. And also, did they run these tests with blind, completely clean queries that were not associated with the company in order to sort of test the validity of what they were claiming? That's all.
I don't think it's as formally structured as an academic research as we were talking in our preamble conversation. Part of it,
I wouldn't expect that at all.
Yeah, but part of it, it's also the CEO leaning into a strategy to also help his team. Like, this is okay, this is not. Firewalling the kind of conversations. And I want you as a team to be learning these tools and using these tools, and in his own anecdotal experience. And it could be because his personal shell within the LLM is being trained by his data, and so when he's getting this, I don't want to call it an echo chamber, but his instance of the LLMs that he's using, it's remembering his sessions, and he's getting better responses from that, and maybe others won't. But so that could be something along those lines. I don't know.
Right. Well, because the one is that if his assertion is correct, we're doomed. Among many other reasons why we're doomed.
Yeah.
Because the ability of random people on the internet to directly affect key sort of search results like that is problematic. But that was not where we were going. I like some of the other ideas better for discussion. I just wanted to flag this.
Yeah, no, it's good.
The anecdote is interesting.
Yeah, that actually would be, if anybody's listening to this, if anybody that has a research paper on that would actually be, a fascinating read. Maybe we can do some searching on that. Okay, going back to what do you guys want to do? You want to do the citation counting exercise, the rover.com business analysis exercise, or the accordion manage your outlines exercise?
Frederick, I think they're all interesting, but the rover one, I'm curious what you actually were able to do, because it sounds like it would be stuff outside of Tinderbox. So I'm not sure how much you did in Tinderbox with that.
Yeah. So okay. Well, and this one's kind of short. So let me pull up one of my records really quick, and then I'll share that. I don't want to. I've got to be careful of disclosing the private data. There we go. All right. Copy that in. Here, give me a second while I set it up here. Remember date. Yeah, okay. All right, so let me copy in a record here and we'll do it. All right, so let me share the screen. Got to get my mouse back here. All right. And it also shows how lucrative doing Rover can be, actually. It's kind of interesting. So, so Rover for me has a tremendous number of benefits. One being, I work from home, so I can have dogs around me and make some extra cash. Two, it's often quite nice to have a furry friend on your lap while you're working. Working at home can get kind of lonely sometimes. So having furry friend on your lap can be interesting. So let's say this is a stay. And so I can copy off of the web page out of Rover a particular stay. And the pattern, and again, part of doing this kind of work is really important in that, especially with these kind of reports, the pattern matching becomes really interesting and powerful. So, every stay is the start end date of the stay, the type of boarding it was done. Was it boarding versus daycare? The client name of the dog, and then the pattern, the price of the stay. Was there a tip? Was there a the Rover service fees and the overall revenue that was generated? From that process, or the final results. So if we go ahead and look at the code then that I wrote, and I'll pull this up. We can start. Let me think of that difference now. Okay, that was a clear the results. That was counted days. All right. So essentially what I did is I looked at the stay and I said, all right, let's create a list. And so the V date is, and that's how I realized I did it. So I realized that the uniqueness of this was I could look at each line as its own individual paragraph. And so I suggested that, so paragraph 0, I'm going to extract and split at the hyphen. So I now know at paragraph 0, I'm getting a start date and an end date. And so then once I've got that list, V date 0 is the start date, V date 1 is the end date. And then I could say string URL is also paragraph 0. So in how did I do? Oh yeah, this is the other thing I did. Let me show you this before I forget. This is reminding me how I actually went about doing this. Yeah, okay. So let me pull. Can I open this up as a standalone? That's fine. Now, how do I open this up? Okay, so anybody know how to open up in, there we go. All right. So here's my Obsidian notes I'm taking from our call today. So one of the things I learned along the way is if I paste in, so if I copy this record from my Rover view, and I'm now going to paste this. If I first paste the data, the HTML into Obsidian, Obsidian automatically takes HTML and converts it to Markdown. So if I view source, pasting that, so that way I can then copy this. So when I paste it into paste it into Tinderbox, I'm actually able to paste in the markdown of the HTML. So I use often Obsidian as a quick and dirty markdown converter for me. So then that works out well. And if I paste it in with a so then that works out well. And so now I have my dates. So that's how this pattern works. So if I was looking at extract at the hyphen, so then that lets me get the dates, the start date, end date. I then can from there extract the URL for the stay. So then I'm able to get that as well. I then can continue down the pattern matching for each of the paragraphs and get the dog's name, depending on the type. It was at house sitting, dog boarding, or doggy daycare. I then can go through and extract the counts of days and all that. So when I apply the stamp, and it looks like something broke in the pattern once I did this last. Okay, I got the name out properly. Oh, because I didn't do the stamp. And so you see now that that then let me get all of the types, and I'll have to play with it a little bit more to populate the type and the pup better. But you'll see I was able to get a breakdown, and looks like my counted days is off too, but I'll figure that out. So that way I was able to quickly get all of that information into Tinderbox. And then what I was able to do is then map the dogs using timeline by start date, end date. And so then I could see, starting from November to today, all the different dogs I've had staying at the house. So, Frederick, does that help?
Yeah, it does. And then it's pretty neat. And for this timeline view, you didn't have to do anything. I have never used the timeline view. You didn't have to do anything special to get this to happen at all.
No, not at all. You just go to settings, and under settings, you can tell tell timeline what date attributes you want the timeline written on. So the default is start date, end date. But if you have your own dates that you've created, you can build timelines off of your own date, user generated date attributes. And so I just said run the timeline for that container on start date, end date, and it just mapped out my dog visits. And then what you can do is you can expand the width. So then if I want to go, get it into weeks or even days. And now I can start viewing the timeline at a broader width.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. That's what I was going to ask. Thank you.
Yeah. And this can be this is really effective. And so you can see all the different pups I've had during the days. Yeah, and I'll play around with later. I don't need to waste our time right now, but you get the idea. You take your regex, you parse your pattern. Clearly, I've done something since the last time I tweaked this that didn't populate the type or the name of the dog properly, and my count days seems to be off. So I'll play with that. Let me see if I can get that right here. Oh, I see. It did 2025 for some reason. There we go. Yeah, so I got 3 days. So that's how I got the day count right. So then and then from there, this is where it got interesting. From there, I was then able to run run an agent on the year, and then I could get a summary of the visits. And this just demonstrates how lucrative dog watching can be in your house. So it's a passive income. I've made like 20 grand. So or 17 grand post Rover fees. So that's fun and interesting example. And if anybody's out there and they're in a market that has rover.com dog sitting, you can make some really nice passive income by watching dogs at your house. Thoughts, comments, reactions, responses? Deadpan, nothing.
Well, I think it's pretty powerful that you can use the regular expressions instead of using sed scripts and other stuff to try to pull out data from HTML and do all that work. It's like going to Obsidian and then using a pattern. You basically did this in no time at all once you know what you're doing.
Yeah, it took maybe 25 minutes to kind of quickly set it up from just like, I wonder if I could use Tinderbox in that way as a quick and dirty reporting tool. And yeah, it was super easy. On that note, we can jump into the citation pattern matching, or I can do a quick, or it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. We can do them all. I can show the accordion thing really quick if you guys are interested in that. And I'm assuming silence is acceptance, so we'll go ahead and just do it. Let me get my new Tinderbox file up and running. Close this one. All that. All right. So let's say, I'm going to grab a example of an outline real quick. Gonna make sure I do it without disclosing stuff. Paste here. Right. Hang on just a second, guys. Yeah. Copy. Come on. My mouse is going nuts here. There we go. All right. Well, let's set this up really quick here. All right, so let's say, do you guys see my Tinderbox note on Deskpad? Give me a thumbs up, just make sure everybody sees what I'm thinking you're seeing.
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks. So let's say you've got sections of a book like dedication and epigraph, table of contents, forward, preference, dedication. So then here you might have an introduction. Let's see, you have part 1, part 2, part 3, and we'll break this up in just a second. So let's go ahead and explode that really quick. And we'll call this one a book. All right. And this can kind of help you out too to see how quickly you can do stuff like this. So we go here. So let's say that those are the sections of our book. Now in our book, we also want to have say chapters. Chapter 1. Chapter 2. 3. Six, and say okay. So let's say we've got this, and then underneath that you can have sections. So you get the idea that you can accordion this stuff out. Now, in order to kind of make this rendering as a file, let's go ahead and drop in the standard Tinderbox template. And let's create a prototype. We'll call it P page. And we will give it let's see, page. Yeah, let's give it a page. All right. And let's say we also have purpose. So one of the things I wanted to do with this was to kind of negotiating with my client. Let's make that a string. Go here, user generated attributes. And we'll make that. So then we go here. All right. So now we've got our elements of our book. And part of what we want to do, and let's assign the prototype here. And so now we go up to view, window, show thing, and you can say there's our book. Now, one thing we want to keep in mind is when you're using the standard standard template, what the standard template does is it here. What the standard template does in Tinderbox is it says your children, your first heading is heading 1, and then all subsequent children are going to be heading 2s in HTML parlance. Now, that's not necessarily the most efficient or effective way to be creating an outline, because you kind of want to have your outlines to be, this would be your heading 1 would be these items to part 1, and then your chapters would be a heading 2, and then sections would be a heading 3, and so on and so on. So you might want to have to accordion that a little bit. And so let's see if I can quickly pull up my modify this template. And I'm kind of doing this on the fly because I hadn't intended to do it. So let's go here and we'll like action. And I'll share this later. So what I want to do with a lot of the times when I do my action code, I will put in a heading depth. So now we want to actually create a user generated attribute we call heading depth. That's a number. And I want to pull out on the second page this and put this here. And so what we're doing here is we're making it so our heading depths actually become dynamic. I paste that in there, and now I create another one. Heading set. That also will be a number. So what this will allow me to do now is when I render the file, I want to change these now to our action codes of value v. Pull this from my existing template, so I'm not guessing. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There it is. Yeah, so if I pull this in to the template, what this essentially allows you to do, no. Yeah, that'll work. So what this will allow you to do here, and we can do the same thing. Yeah. We'll explain what's happening right here. So let's put that up here too. Okay, so by doing this, let's just kind of walk through the code of what we just said. So we're saying when the template launches, set your heading depth to 0. And so what this and then so when I click on a book, the heading depth of this top line title will be 0. And then when it renders its children, what it's now saying is make the heading depth of this child the heading depth of the parent plus 1. So what that means is dedication's heading depth is going to be number 1. The heading depth of number 2 will be chapter 1, and so on and so on. So if you had a section here, section 1, section 2. The heading depths of these sections of your book would effectively be 3. So it'd be 0, 1, 2, 3. So then, does that make sense if we do that? Yeah. So if I go ahead and preview, and it looks like, what did I do wrong here? Okay, I didn't close the tag. I didn't close the tag there. I copy and pasted it wrong. Like that, and I got to close the tag. So now I've got open and close tags, and I got to do it in the beginning too because I didn't copy paste it properly. So essentially what you see here then, so if you recall what we had before, we had heading 1, the text or title, sorry. So that so that is the standard kind of heading 1 tags, and all we're doing is we're dynamically generating the heading 1 on the fly using the value that the action code is creating for us. So there's a lot of value or benefits in doing this. So this allows you to actually, if you have this basic little trick that we Mark and I developed this, I guess, a few years ago. If you use this basic little trick, it allows you to create your outline structure anywhere within your document, regardless of whether or not it's on root. So, for example, I never do my projects on root, so I'll say my writings folder. And so if I stick that down in here, then that way, no matter where I'm at from root on, I will be able to generate the first note I select and I render always will start at 0 or always will start at 1, depending on where I'm at. Versus if you're not doing that, Tinderbox will consider the root heading 1, the next down heading 2, heading 3, and so therefore you can't really use the outlining structure uh, um, of Tinderbox without applying this methodology. Before I move forward, does that make sense? I want to just make sure I'm not kind of running past people. Mark Anderson, or can you say that a little bit more clearly for me, Mark? Thank you for the fireworks, Mark. I appreciate it.
I just saying no, absolutely. And one of the other nice flexibilities and a variation on that I use is when I'm doing some things for the university group I'm helping at the moment, I often put in a header just to remind those who won't sort of read the headline and then sort of charge on for direction, say, this is an internal document. This is not to be sent to your mum, your social media, whatever. These are sort of incidentally, these are partial findings and things.
Yeah.
And just simply by putting a little bit of extra metadata in your notes, you can make your template filter that sort of thing out so it doesn't get numbered. So this approach actually is remarkably useful because it on the face of it, it just uses the outline, but it's done in a way that allows you to play all sorts of useful tricks off it.
Yeah. So there, if you do that now and we render the book, you'll see we have now the unlike before. And again, you can tweak a style sheet where you can actually define your own heading 0. And so then and that's kind of how I have my titles and defined to be centered and bold and in different colors and all that. But we're not going to play or deal with style sheets right now. So you'll see that we have and for some reason I'm getting doubles. Why am I getting doubles? Oh, I know why. Because I put them twice in the title. Did I put title in twice? Huh. Why am I getting everything twice, Mark? It shouldn't be. Oh, I think because it says title and
No, it's the styling. If you look,
no,
the HTML tells you.
I know why. Because when I exploded, I didn't remove the titles from the text. I do that all the time. So if I go here and I hit stamps, we'll just go text equals. There you go. So now we've nuked the text. Now we have our dutiful outline. So you'll see now, and then if you want, we can actually add to our template here, and we can say heading. Should work. Actually, let's do it this way. I will tweak this page and I'll say type. And we'll create that as a string. And this will be helpful. So this is this type here is a part. And in my templates, I have all of this dynamically happening, which I can show you guys in a second if we get time when we're done. Oops. Part. And then these are chapters. All right. And it's much easier when you have all the on ads and prototyping, automate all that. So now if we do that and we go back to our template and we say if we don't need an if to value type. So by doing that, we now get chapter one, part one, part. What did I do wrong here?
I think you meant to put that declaration inside the heading.
Yeah, you're right. I did. No, I want part one. Let me just double check here. Part one, chapter one.
It may be because you've inserted some text, right? You've inserted some text with nothing around it. So the browser's going to assume it's a paragraph. So it's going to put a line break after the.
Oh, yeah. Is that why I did that?
That would be my assumption.
All right. Well, okay.
The browsers are pretty good at understanding human written code.
So here we got part one, part two, chapter one, chapter two, and all of that. So now the next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to make this kind of a accordion style. So what I did is I said, let me look again. This one I didn't plan on doing this demonstration, so let me just grab my code here. Oh yeah, and then I added another Boolean up on the main book because I wanted to make it is collapsible. Right, so I created a Boolean called is collapsible. And then I will just copy it. Oops, come on. We'll copy this from this code here. Well, let's just do this. Because I don't want to overly complicate. And then in each of the different sections, I would actually give the a purpose for the content. So if I'm like this, so this was a way for me to kind of explain to the authors, right? So I won't do it all, but you'll get the idea of it. So if I go down here now and I say, now what I want to do is I want to say purpose. Colon, and then value, I'll say purpose. Right, so then if we render this, what what you'll and I got to get the bold off. Should all be, oh, there you go. Okay, so now what I'm able to do is start showing the people, okay, here's our book, and here's the purpose of what we're going to say for each of these different sections. So we can start thinking about then how we want to be able to talk about that book. But when you're you're wanting to get the overall sense of the book first and say, let's just talk about the parts first and let's talk about the chapters first. Here's something I learned just recently. So if you say details and then you put in summary, and then summary like that, and details like that. What this HTML does is it actually creates a little drop down. Now, I did put it in the wrong place. Oh, that's right. Here. I think I want the summary here. Is this where I want it? I don't remember. If I do that. No, I still got it in the wrong place. And by the way, this is another little trick that people might not be aware of. If you open up the text pad, you can have your template sitting here right to the side. Let me look at my other file and see how did I do that. Okay. It was, I think summary needs to be here. Here, let's try that again. Now, details, heading, summary. I was all excited to show this to you guys. I'm going to screen it up. Well, I think the detail, or maybe it was this one. Maybe I did it here. So this is how you can kind of experiment with playing with this stuff. I do that. That's how I did it. No. What did I do? Right. Well, let's see.
So
Where am I?
what does the show what
What I wanted
element does the show and return work off?
what I wanted to do is I wanted to should. Why is the purpose value showing up before then? Just a minute. Details. Let me.
Could the paragraph tag be ending the details somehow?
Yeah, it could be. Just a minute. Details before the block sections. Yeah, I've got mine so complicated, it's hard to make it simple now. You can just copy it over. I don't think so. Well, it could be. Let's remove this real quick just to see. It could be that is the happening. There you go. Yeah, I think you were right. It's something to do with that. Yeah, so what I was able to, but and then so what I was able to do was be
Your
able to
summary closes but doesn't open. I don't know if that matters.
oh, it does matter. Summary. Yeah, but I don't know why the purpose is coming before value. It's going wrong here.
Well, the note to self moment out of this, and I say this only because I this is something I trip off across all the time, is that
Yeah,
when you're doing the simple stuff before you add all the extra in, is making a note to self, later self, about
Yeah.
where the actual trigger point, in other words, where,
Here it
you
is.
know, there's all this other stuff you put in that actually is moot as regards the basic functionality you're trying to do. But once you've added extra bits in, it can be a bit hard to remember.
Yeah,
What's doing the actual heavy lift.
This is what I wanted to do. So the idea then would be, because I wanted them to be able to see the book with the different chapters. So then I could go in here and say, okay, there's the purpose. Okay, that's the way I did it. I was doing it around the purpose, not the title. So that way I could, as they were reading it, they could say, oh, okay, here's the purpose. And they could expand. And then what I said was, I created a details class section block. This was kind of fun. And then I said, this is code I can't copy over. I said, is part Boolean. So the parts, I made is part. That's right. I didn't do it as a type. I did it as a Boolean. So these were the parts. And I have, obviously I have prototypes for chapters and parts, but we're not doing it in this example. This chapter. And I'll just do it on these first ones. This chapter. Oops, the chapter should be a Boolean. Okay, so that's a chapter. That's a chapter. Chapter. Okay, and then I gave myself a style sheet 2. So I'll go ahead and copy and paste this into my template now. So I changed the details here where I said details equals class section block. If it's a part, summarize it as a part. If it's a chapter, summarize it as a chapter. I'll just do this, and then that does that. And so then if I pull my style sheet in, where goes my, oops. So I created a style sheet. For that. Yeah. Oh, I got these stylings as well. So these are the styles I used. And then we go to our template in the beginning. And we say style. Say value. Text. CSS. So that's how we get the styles in. So now if I do that, you'll see that we can do this, and you'll notice how get the purposes. And then if I indent this more, what I was able to do, and we're running out of time for me able to do this today, but you can cascade the template so that the parts even, so when you click on a part, the chapters fall underneath the parts. And don't do it. But this was a nice little trick that I was able to do. And I don't have time to show you how I got it because I won't be able to figure it out on the fly. But I was able to tell Tinderbox, if you're a part, collapse the chapters underneath the part. So then that way people could get a overall sense of what was going on in the book and could be able to go up and down the outline very quickly. And all said and done, this probably took me maybe 90 minutes to figure out. when I was quiet and not doing it live. And then I was able to change the template by adding this in, which then made the overall template a little bit more flexible by saying, see if I can grab this code, and this will be the last part that I think we need. Is I drop this in and says if is collapsible parent equals true, or is collapsible grandparent equals true, then show this. Otherwise, don't. And then what that allowed, so if you put in like an if condition like this, then that allowed me to turn on and off. So if I had the Boolean is collapse, make that a Boolean. So I set my template up so that if this was true, then the collapsing would work. And if that was false, then the collapsing summaries wouldn't be there. And so then I was able to go back and forth between here's the entire document and here's the collapsible version of the document. And then from that, I was able to then export this standalone page out. We say export this out as a standalone note, the drive. Let's throw it in downloads, export that out. I'll go to my downloads now and open it up. Go. Let me export it again. Now, what's the word? Find it. Yes. Let's close. Okay, so then I can say here is that file. And then I was able to, okay, why didn't that show up? So for some reason, that didn't work. HTML page, collapsible. Let's just screw something up. Oh, because I left the if stuff in there. That's why. So there's our page. If we export it, the standalone notes to here. Now we can open it up. And then I was then able to email this file to the client. Now, where you need some of the styling is, to Frederick's point earlier, the summary will put a paragraph block in front of the note unless you do some special CSS, which we can share later. But this kind of just shows you the flexibility that you can use when playing around with Tinderbox, and it can be really, really helpful for just creating output that you can share with others and such. Okay, well, we're a little bit over time, so we won't be able to get to the citation counting, but hopefully people found this somewhat interesting. Thoughts, reactions, remarks from our experimentation of the toy today? Okay. All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much. If there's no other reactions, thoughts, or comments, we can go ahead and end there. But that's just a little exercise on playing with Tinderbox templates. All right, everybody. See you later. Hi there. At the end of today's meetup, we didn't get to finish the outlining functionality that I was trying to show. So I went ahead and amped up the code, and let me just show you the distinctions that I added since the end of our meetup. So effectively what I went in and did is I added in prototypes for page, chapters, and parts just to make the structure a little bit more easier to manage. I refined the CSS a little bit, and I tweaked the HTML to add in the is collapsible capabilities and some styling for the HTML. So what that then allows us to do, and this was the ultimate objective I had, is I wanted to be able to demonstrate how you could create a collapsible outline. So you can, and you'll notice like when I open up parts 3, you see chapter 7, 8, and 9. When I close that, those chapters go away. When you see part 1, you get chapters 1, 2, and 3, etc. So it's a nice way to create an accordion style for your outlining when you're trying to iterate and think through what's going on at a high level versus a short level, and you want or detailed level, and you want to be sharing that with people. And then because of the if conditionals on the is collapse, when you uncheck that, you can get a complete output of the chapter. So that's what I was trying to show. Sorry I couldn't finish it while we were actually doing it live with the meetup, but hopefully you will all find this of some interest or value. Thanks. Bye bye.